I just wanted to share a couple of segments with you. One was by Eyes Left podcast. It's just about 6 or 7 minutes long, and it is by Sergeant Kevin Benderman, who's conscientious objector in the Iraq War. Sergeant Benderman joined the military before 9/11, and he said that he wasn't joining the military for the purpose of the poverty draft, which so many people do join. He basically recounts how he was appalled at the kinds of things that he was expected to do while in Iraq, and that's why it kind of pushed him to become a conscientious objector. And with that, when he applied for conscientious objector status, he was immediately met with a tremendous opposition to that, even by the chaplain. They basically didn't even read why he wanted to be a conscientious objector. So there's a lot of burying heads in the sand going on there, but also because you don't want somebody who is a sergeant, a non-commissioned officer, you don't want somebody like that talking about what is going on there. You want people to believe there's some, like the mainstream media, corporate media, show the public, they demonstrate some kind of false narrative about, if they bother at all to talk about it. So it's very important for the military and for the US national security state to either keep things under lock and key and censored, so nobody thinks about what's going on there, not even to mention the 22 a day veterans who kill themselves. The whole idea is to just keep it all going along smoothly, under like software under everything, no matter who's in office. Just keep it all going, and hopefully the public will not find out anything about it and will not object to what's going on. So that is the purpose of vilifying people who are conscientious objectors. There was a number of charges thrown at Sergeant Benderman, which were ridiculous, he said, and he just so much wanted to get out because he couldn't bring himself to go back again and do what he was expected to do. And so he details one event where there was some Iraqi children were sort of throwing things at the soldiers from on top of a rooftop, and they were coming back every so often to do that. And his commanding officer said, if they return, those children, I want you to shoot them. These are like 10-year-old children. Now, this is why, can you imagine how many stories are like that we never ever hear of? And that's why when I talked about the Afghanistan files and what David McBride, the whistleblower in Australia, revealed to the public, and how he's being vilified like Julian Assange. Not Julian Assange is being tortured, has been tortured for the last 10 years. And David McBride, the whistleblower from Australia, is looking. He was in the military. He's looking at life imprisonment. So it's very, very important for the U.S. national security state and also the vassal states, the U.S. lackeys like my country, Australia, and the UK, all the Western imperialist allies. It's very important for the U.S. national security state to keep control of the narrative, and that's why you have people like Julian Assange who are facing extradition, even though they're not even a U.S. citizen, and looking at probably 175 years in prison, which is a death sentence, also looking at special administrative measures, which means he'll never ever see probably another human being again. So, they demonstrate over and over again, all these different stories, when you put them together, that control of the narrative is very important, because they want these imperialist wars to go on, never ending basically, because there's corporations with a lot of money involved in it, weapons industry and all of that. Even during the Vietnam War, I mean, there were the airlines industry, transporting troops to Vietnam. They had a lot of vested interest in that. There's a whole bunch of industries who have investment in these wars continuing on ad infinitum. And of course, a lot of these politicians who either vote for these wars or vote to give huge amounts of military spending, they are all complicit, because they're all benefiting in some way from the lobbyists and these ongoing wars. Sergeant Kevin Benderman, he had to spend 15 months in prison, and he had to lose his pension and all the other benefits that you get, because he was didn't have long before he was going to retire. And he lost his marriage. He lost a whole lot of things because of his conscience basically not wanting to return to terrorizing Iraqi civilians and killing children. I've mentioned in other videos when I talk about the Afghanistan files in Australia and the war crimes there, and war is a crime, I sort of point out that these crimes that are happening are not aberrations. They're not something that is out of the ordinary. That commanding officer that asked Sergeant Kevin Benderman to kill those Iraqi children because they were throwing some things at soldiers, that's not something that's unusual. You only have to hear just some stories from other soldiers in this Eyes Left podcast, and you see that it isn't an aberration, that destroying towns, killing animals just for fun, killing human beings just because they're there, they happen to be either pushing back or they're there anyway. They're all seen as the enemy just because they happen to live in the country. It's just an appalling mess, and that's why we need to, because there's over 1 million, maybe 2 million Iraqis now have been murdered by this US occupational force and the Western imperialist allies. And we should be doing our very best to bring this to the attention of the public, because it's very clear that the corporate media don't want to do that. I mean, they're funded by the weapons industry. You even see advertisements of weapons industries, sort of funding basically the news programs. They end up getting CIA people as their commentators, their talking heads, ex-weapons people. There's no point in expecting the mainstream corporate media to talk about this with the public. They're not going to. So it's all sort of it's very important for the corporate mainstream media and the U.S. national security state and a lot of politicians, no matter which side they're on in the U.S. and including Australia. It's very important that people are lulled to sleep with little stories about how things are going, and never ever hearing about any of the the suicides and the war crimes. And as I said, war is a crime. All of that. We won't hear any of that because it's very important to keep these wars going and for the public to not even think about them. I'll just play you this excerpt by Eyes Left podcast and Mike Preisner, who is also a vet from Iraq. So Mike Preisner knows all about it, and he's been an anti-war activist for a very long time. And as you know, he does the hosting of the Empire Files with his partner Abby Martin. Let's do our best to try and spread around this message, this anti-war, anti-imperialist message, because these awful, endless wars have to end.
So you were a mechanic that very quickly became basically an infantry soldier.
Well, the thing that really stood out is we were not fighting any kind of an organized militia or military force whatsoever. We were rousting grandmas and grandpas out of bed at 3 a.m. And at that time, I started thinking, there is no need for me to be pointing an M16 at this little 90-pound, 70-year-old woman as we roused her out of her bed at 3 a.m. I said, never in my life I would be asked to do that in any capacity as a soldier of the United States. That was beyond the pale for me. Another thing that stood out, too, is that when we first got to that town, we had to clear out a building in the middle of the town. And so our company commander and the first sergeant wanted to use that as their temporary command post. And while we were there cleaning it up and getting it secured, and there was a bunch of kids from that town that would come to that building that we had taken over, and they would climb. There was about a 4-foot high little brick wall that was around the building, and they would climb up on that wall and they would laugh. One or two of them would throw a couple of small pebbles, and we'd tell them to get off the wall. And while we were installing concertina wire around the perimeter, one day the captain came out of the building and told us that if those kids climbed back up on that wall, to shoot them.
Wow.
And I had a specialist and 2 or 3 privates over there, and I just looked at them and did I hear that right? And they gave me that look back, and I just looked at the captain, and he turned around and walked back to the building. But there was no way I would have shot a 9-year-old kid. I couldn't believe I heard that. I'm like, what in the hell, people? I said, I won't do that. I'd shoot that captain before I shot one of those small children.
And you would have been justified in doing so. And so you said about halfway through your deployment, you started questioning things. And so, like, that second half of your deployment, what was really going on with you mentally?
All we were doing was harassing the civilian population, and we were there to doggone secure the oil fields, which had nothing to do with the attacks of September the 11th, 2001. And doing all these things that, like, as I said, I never would have thought as a professional soldier anyone would have ever asked me to do anything of that nature. But on our march from Kuwait up to Tikrit over to that town called Konakin, we came to a huge storage depot that was full of standard ammunition. You know, it had machine gun rounds, mortar rounds, tank rounds, and a few hand grenades laying around there. And we moved in to secure that. And so the NCO for the mortar platoon sent two of his guys down there, a private first class and a private, to start loading those mortars on the truck. I got down there, they had one of them was on the truck, and one of them was picking up the mortars and handing it to the other guy, and they were stacking them in the truck, which is what they should have been doing. But then Sergeant First Class Kelly comes down there, pissing and moaning and raising hell, telling them they're moving too slow, and he just started throwing those mortars on the truck. So, you know, a PFC and a private, they're all, yes, Sergeant, you know, and they jumped down and started tossing mortars on the truck. And one of them landed on the fuse and it was exploded. And that was our first casualty that I'm aware of. And it was caused by our very own acting first sergeant, a complete idiot.
Yeah, I mean, that's a common theme with soldiers' resistance and rebellion, right? Is just the incompetence of the people that are in charge of them, the unnecessary risk of life and the lives of others and of civilians by just like incompetent, stupid, like award-chasing officers and high-ranking NCOs.
Oh yeah, they were extremely, they were childish in their approach to war. Captain, the one I told you told us to shoot kids, Captain Morgado, they brought in this other captain. On the way into our AO, he had saw a horse, you know, a statue of some horse that was in the town. And it was a stud horse, and it had all the right equipment. And so this idiot told two of our mechanics to go over there and get that horse and cut his genitals off so he can back and put on his wall. I'm like, this is the fraternity crap that you do in college. This is real world stuff where people are dying, you know.
One of the things, of course, that's making your consciousness shift is, you know, you said the idea of what the mission was about went up in smoke. You know, you were guarding oil fields, and that was a very on-the-nose representation of what you're doing there. Then you have this element of your command was just incompetent. They were brutal. They were ordering you to do things that you could never picture yourself doing. You know, they're putting people's lives in danger by just being incompetent leaders. And of course, those things are very much things that would make you not want to be a part of it anymore, just for your own self-preservation. Like, your life is in the hand of people you very much do not trust. But then there's this other element, and that's your recognition of what the war was like for the people that lived in the country. I remember there was an NPR interview you did where you described a young girl who was seriously wounded on the side of the road. And talk about how this element kind of played into your moral transformation there. It wasn't just that your life was in danger by dumb officers or that you weren't going to get killed for George W. Bush's oil contracts. There is this other thing playing out in your consciousness as well, and that was like the impact on people that you had no reason to see as your enemy.
Again, I mean, I don't want to blow my own horn, but you met me in person. I mean, and you've seen how big I am. I had no business over there harassing those tiny little people, the grandparents and children, and I just couldn't. My command structure of the country that I swore an oath to would ever put me in a position to do something of that nature. That little girl that I described, we passed her up on the side of the road, and I don't know if that woman was her mother or her sister or her aunt or who she was, but she was crying. The little girl was crying. They were waving at us, and we just drove right on by them, left her laying there. We were over there hurting them. The things that we were doing wasn't stopping any of the people that did shoot at us, but And that was a big part of why I said I wanted no part of it. It's just not right.
Right, and probably not only did it not stop the people who were shooting at you, doing the types of operations you were doing, but it kind of also probably, I know this was my experience, it kind of made it make sense, like to put yourself in the shoes of the people that were being raided, imagine having someone come into your grandmother's house and pointing a rifle in her face and pushing her around. Were you starting to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the Iraqi people and what you would be doing if your home in Alabama got raided by people from another country and were abusing your family members like that?
Of course. I mean, there would be no way I would stand by. And I mean, that just added fuel to the fire. We weren't stopping the people that were shooting. We were just creating more people that wanted to shoot at us because we were harassing innocent people, and a lot of incidents killing them. I mean, there was a guy that was just driving along and we didn't know that we had put up those concrete barriers across the highway, and he slammed into it, and he panicked and kept driving toward the thing, and they just shot him with a 50 caliber machine gun. I mean, killed him right there, And that guy was just trying to get home from wherever he was. It was just an empty car. No weapons in the vehicle whatsoever. And I mean, just blew him away. When I got on that plane, I was processing all of it, I guess, and I was just glad to be going home. But then while I was at home, I was sitting there thinking of all this stuff that we had done, and that they were going to send us back and expect me to do the same thing over again. And I was just, I can't do that. There is no way that I can do that. That the people that they were asking me to do that to had absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with any attacks on this country. It was all a lie. They sent us over there based on nothing but lies and their own greed and personal enrichment.
So you're back and you've decided that you can't go again. And this is early on in the Iraq War, so it's obvious that there's going to be more deployments. I mean, by the time you left, things were just starting to heat up big time. So it was obvious to you that things were going to keep going. Even if you got out of the next deployment, there was going to be another one after that. And so you had made up your mind at that time that you weren't going to go again. I know you changed units. You got sent to the 3rd Infantry Division. When did you actually? And what was it that made you really decide, like, you were actually not going to go? You were going to file for CO. You were going to do whatever it took to not go on another deployment. How did you come to that really major decision? Because, you're a non-commissioned officer. You had people under you. You had been in the military for quite a long time. You went into the military so you could retire. So you didn't actually have that many years left until you were going to retire, which is the whole point of you going back in the military to begin with. But then at some point you decided that you were going to do this very major thing, which was refuse to go back, when you probably could have just sucked it up and gone back again and maybe done one other deployment and then been able to get out. That seems like a very profound decision. How did you come to that?
Well, after I got back and I went through the whirlwind of transferring from Fort Hood to Fort Stewart and getting my wife and getting all of our household moved, and just had time to think about different things and different aspects and the lies that we were told to get us involved into that invasion of Iraq. I was just not going to do it anymore. I wasn't going back over there to harass the civilian population of that country for no good reason. I mean, it was against everything that I ever was, and I just couldn't take part in it anymore.